I'm about to burn my aunt's house to the ground because I'm too lucky. I stink of gasoline, I'm fucking terrified I'm going to die, but burning my aunt's house down is my only option. For context, when I was born, my mother died in the birthing pool. I was born inside scarlet water, swimming around in my mother's blood. Dad called me an omen, but he did say that I was a happy baby. I came out silent and smiling. I didn't cry until the paramedics pulled me out of the birthing pool, the warm slurry of my mother's entrails. According to my father, he was told that my mother just popped. She was healthy and I was healthy. I was ready to be born and there were zero complications. And then, my mother was gone. Dad said there were no hard feelings and he did love me, but he couldn't be near me anymore. Apparently, household appliances would just kind of explode out of nowhere. But again, I was a happy baby. The microwave blew up, but I found an extra chicken nugget in my dinner. Dad fell down the stairs and hurt his back, and on the way to the emergency room, there was candy in the ambulance. Dad didn't even say goodbye. I was 5 years old. I remember him holding me at arm's length all the way to my aunt's house. On the way, he tripped and bruised his face, but I landed on a mattress on someone's lawn. When we reached Aunt Em's place, I thought it was just for the afternoon, but Dad ran away before she could open the door. I waited for him to come back, but my father was gone. I started a new life, and it wasn't so bad, even if Aunt Em refused to let me near my cousins. She split the lounge into two. Jonas and Jesse were on the side with the TV and the toys, and I was on my own little side with my own books and toys. Jonas stood on his tiptoes one day trying to pass me one of his toys. He told me that his mommy was scared of me and considered me as bad luck. His words were only reinforced when Aunt Em came into the room and freaked out, violently pulling my cousin away from me. To her credit, my aunt still smiled politely at me, even if both of us knew it was fake. Aunt Em dragged Jonas upstairs and bathed her son thoroughly, as if scrubbing me off of him. When he came back, sopping wet and draped in a towel, I expected my cousin to follow in his mother's footsteps. Instead, he waved and mouthed, "Sorry," before his mother gently turned his head away from me. Jessie, meanwhile, ignored her mother, sitting as close to me as possible to prove my aunt wrong. I thought Jessie was right, and maybe my aunt was being too strict. But then the TV blew up. After that incident, the four of us were separated for my cousin's safety. I wasn't allowed near my cousins. Growing up, the rules were relaxed slightly. Instead of staying behind the white gate, I was transferred into my very own room. I could leave and enter any time I wanted, but only when Jesse and Jonas were not in the house. But my cousins refused to lock me out of their lives, despite me almost indirectly killing them. The two grew curious about my separation as we got older and made it their goal to sneak into my room. At 8 years old, I was sitting on my bed watching Pokemon. It was summer, and I remember the sticky heat baking the back of my neck. Aunt Em had opened the window and left me popsicles on a tray, so I was slowly making my way through them, shaking my head to get rid of brain freeze. I was mindlessly chewing on a popsicle stick when Jessie's head appeared at the window, her lips split into a wide grin. Anxiety immediately started to prick in my gut. I was strictly told to stay away from my cousins, but they were making it increasingly harder, especially as a lonely 8-year-old, whose only friends were the cartoons I watched on the TV. I couldn't help myself, slipping off of my bed and rushing over to the window, where Jessie was balancing on her father's ladder. Even as a kid, I knew exactly what was going to happen. Jessie. I hugged her when she wrapped her arms around me, giggling. I had to guess that she was mid-sugar rush. When I leaned out of the window, I glimpsed Jonas teetering on the third step. "What are you doing?" I couldn't resist a laugh, but I was very aware of the wobbling ladder swaying back and forth. "Shh," she whispered. "We've come to save you," Jonas groaned loudly. "You're not supposed to tell him the surprise." I reached out to steady the ladder, and my cousin shot me a grateful smile. "Surprise?" Jessie nodded, pressing one fist over her heart. I had to grab for the ladder again when she wobbled, her eyes going wide. "Whoa!" Jessie shot her brother a glare. "You're not holding it correctly." "Am too," Jessie stamped on the ladder. "If I fall, I'm telling Mom. And I'm telling Mom this was your idea." Jessie stomped again. "I'm the captain and you do what I say. Hold the ladder." When Jonas responded with a grumbled yell, I laughed, tightening my grip on the ladder. I loved my cousins more than anything in the world. From the second I walked into their lives, they never judged or belittled me. I was just another kid they wanted to play with. Jessie turned back to me, mocking a serious face. I remember the playful glitter in her eyes, freckles dancing across her cheeks. "Do you swear to protect the identity of the Sunny Pirates?" "I do," I said. Jessie curled her lip, motioning for me to copy her. "You need to swear." "I swear," I said, punching my heart with real passion, just like I saw on my favorite show. "I swear to protect the identity of the Sunny Pirates." "I do too," Jonas yelled from below us. Jessie grinned. "Do you want to help us dig for buried treasure?" In the fleeting second it took me to say yes, I watched my cousin slowly fall backwards, her expression unwavering. She was laughing like she wasn't falling to her death, caught in a whirlwind of hair. I don't remember crying out or even moving when Jessie toppled off of the ladder and hit the rough concrete of our driveway with a sickening smack. Jonas started screaming. When I managed to move my body and force myself to peer down, a slow-spreading pool of red stemmed around Jessie's crumpled form. When I twisted around, I glimpsed a quarter at my feet. I didn't move again for a long time, standing in the same spot, my legs aching as I watched a blur of flashing red and blue lights take my cousin away. If I moved, something bad was going to happen, so I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot until around midnight, when the door slammed shut downstairs and my light flickered off. I could hear my aunt screaming, and I blocked her out, burying my head in my knees and slamming my hands over my ears. I was half asleep when my door flew open. I was expecting my aunt, but it was Jonas. I could barely see him, his face cast in shadow. He was in front of me in 3 strides, and I remember being terrified of the hollow look in his eyes. "Jessie is okay," Jonas said softly, startling me by pulling me into a hug. "See?" He broke into sobs, his tears soaking through my shirt. "You're not bad luck." He squeezed me tighter and I felt myself crumple. "You brought Jessie back." But even as I hugged my cousin, the lights flickered. I looked up, watching as the glass fixture swung violently, and yet there was no wind, not even a summer breeze to nudge it. I was suddenly far too aware of the ornate chain creaking with every swing, my gut twisting into knots. These things had always scared me. M's house was an antique collector's wet dream, but these things were ancient. Before I could react, the fixture snapped, and I shoved my cousin out of the way, stumbling backward just as the light crashed to the floor, shattering into dust. For a moment I stood, waiting for Jonas to stand directly in the glass and cut open his foot, but he didn't move, letting out a breath. "Whoa!" I dropped to my knees in a frenzy, trying to clean it up when I noticed that the glass wasn't cutting my hands. I was grasping for it, scooping it up without thinking, and somehow every shard missed me. I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed a splinter of silver and dragged it across my palm. Nothing. No blood, no scar, not even a scrape. "Are you a witch?" Jonas's mouth curled into a slight smile when I looked up at him. "You're like a superhero," he whispered excitedly. "Can you, move things with your mind?" Jonas. M's voice startled both of us, and I pretended not to notice my cousin suddenly backing away from me, his expression morphing from excitement to disgust. But Jonas was a bad actor, shooting me a grin when he thought his mother wasn't looking. I had to guess that she'd made him promise to stay away from me, and I couldn't blame her. Immediately, Jonas tried to say he broke the light fixture, catapulting into a semi-coherent lie which went something like, "I didn't mean to break it. I was throwing a ball up and down and hit it, and Eris didn't have anything to do with it. You can even ask him, I swear." "I don't want to hear it." Her tone sent shivers creeping down my spine. I had always admired her obsession with staying calm and collected, despite being faced with the possibility of losing her children every single day. She always made sure that I knew she loved me, despite being forced to put precautions in place. Now, however, my aunt didn't smile, tell me everything was going to be okay. M's bright yellow summer dress was still stained with my cousin's blood. Her half-lidded eyes were haunted, her head tipped sideways like she was sleepwalking. She didn't even look at the pile of dust and glass on my carpet. Instead, my aunt simply gestured for my cousin to follow her out of the room. I pretended not to care that she locked the door behind her. After almost losing my cousin, I chose to stay in my room, and to no surprise, my aunt was happy with me staying secluded. As I grew into a tween, this phenomenon only got worse. I became luckier, while the people around me were cursed. Since adopting me, my aunt had broken 3 fingers, electrocuted herself twice, and almost drowned in the bath. She had broken multiple phones, had to replace 6 television screens and 3 separate light fixtures. However, apart from Jesse's accident when we were 8, my bad luck seemed to leave them alone. Still, though, my aunt wasn't taking any chances. I had to keep my distance, despite both of them arguing that whatever was wrong with me was sparing them. I mean, they were right. I accidentally hugged Jesse and nothing happened. I chased Jonas around the house playing "The Floor is Lava" and nothing exploded, blew up, or died. It looked like my cousins were safe. Aunt Em, however, made sure to stay away from me. She made me promise that no matter what, I was leaving at 18, and once I left for college, I would no longer be welcome in the family. I have to admit this fucking hurt because I knew my aunt would force her children to sever contact too. I wanted to tell her that this wasn't my fault, and it wasn't fair that adults were blaming me for something I couldn't help. But I just nodded and smiled, grateful for her keeping me for as long as she had. School was surprisingly safe, at least until junior high. When I was 12, I stepped on a first edition Charizard on the playground. I bent down to pick it up, checking and rechecking the card to make sure, but it was as clear as day. The card was in perfect condition, like it had fallen from the sky. I was glued to the spot, excitement thrumming through me, clashing with a sudden nausea twisting my gut into knots. Luck was usually followed with something bad happening. Several days earlier, I found a chip shaped like SpongeBob. Barely a second after sharing it with my cousins, my aunt dropped her brand new phone. That's when I started piecing together how it all worked, thanks to Jonas's hypothesis, proclaimed from the top of the jungle gym with his arms spread out like he was teasing fate. He was standing way too close to the edge for it to feel like a coincidence. Jonas pointed at me. "I've got it," he announced, teetering on the edge. I watched him feverishly. Jessie, who was sitting next to me, hiding behind her notebook. But either my cousin was way too good at keeping his balance, or the entangled red thread had other plans. He grinned, triumphant. The luckier you get, the worse the bad luck is for someone else. Jonas blew a raspberry. "Sue, if you find a quarter, maybe someone nearby will fall and, twist their ankle." His eyes darkened suddenly, his expression twisting. "But..." Jonas straightened up, standing on one leg to test fate even further. "Let's say you find $10,000 instead." He caught my eye, his lip curling. "That's like a guaranteed death sentence. You'll be killing someone." "Jonas!" Jessie whisper-shrieked. "You can't just say that." He rolled his eyes. "It's true. Mom's been saying it since we were little kids." Jonas's words rattled in my skull, the card slipping through my clammy fingers. I stepped on it, stamping it into the ground in hopes of somehow burying the luck of finding it, but I couldn't erase the fact that I had found it. I was trying to tear it up, hysterical sobs building in my throat, when a scream rang out across the playground. I didn't move. I was too fucking scared to move, to breathe, to turn around. Behind me, Zoe had been practicing a cheer routine with 3 other girls. She was their flyer. When a cacophony of screams followed the first girl's shriek, I forced myself to turn around. Zoe was on the ground, her neck bent at a jarring angle, her eyes wide open, like she was still caught in a cheer. According to the authorities, Zoe had snapped her spine. But I knew the truth. Whatever this thing was had killed her. I shouldn't have been near her, and yet I was, playing with a fucking Pokemon card. I wanted to drop out, but my aunt refused to trust me at home during the day. At 15 years old, I scored a perfect 100 on an essay I barely paid attention to. My teacher, Mr. L, was skeptical after handing me my paper. "Congratulations, Eris," he said, passing by my desk, his voice oozing with sarcasm. "I will be checking your work for plagiarism because there is no way you scored perfect marks without even reading the book." He emphasized each word, prodding my unopened copy of The Crucible with a pointed finger. "You kids must think I was born yesterday." I was staring at my 100% mark when my teacher collapsed behind me. He suffered a stroke that rendered him brain dead. It hit me that I was indirectly hurting people, and I couldn't stop it. Out of nowhere, I was awarded early admission to a college that accepted me without explanation. When I got home, a gunman was holding my aunt and cousins hostage around our dinner table. He wanted cash, and my aunt was calmly leading him to her purse. I made the mistake of stepping over the threshold, and Aunt M's brains splattered on the table, the crack of the gunshot ringing in my skull. What confused me was that this was the first time I wasn't lucky. My aunt was dead, but for some reason my luck was gone. Jonas screamed, his cry muffled by a strip of duct tape over his mouth. He was covered in his mother's blood, slick on his cheeks. The gunman grabbed my aunt's purse, stuck his revolver to the back of Jonas's head, and blew his brains out. Except no, it was a blank. The gunman tried again, pressing the barrel to my cousin's temple, and pulled the trigger. Nothing. Click after click after click. Blank after blank after blank. Jonas surprised me, a hysterical giggle muffling through his gag. "Do it again," he teased, spitting the tape off of his mouth. My cousin leaned forward as far as his restraints would let him. His eyes were wide, almost unseeing, with the type of glee, of pleasure, an amalgamation of relief and agony, turning him into what I imagined a god would resemble. Jonas didn't believe in death because of what I did to him. I think it was a mixture of adrenaline and excitement that made him wink at me. "Do it!" He shook his head, his expression twisting and contorting, his mother's blood staining his cheeks. I don't think Jonas could feel her. I don't even think he could see his mother's corpse slumped in her chair. His eyes were wide and unseeing. "Shoot me again. Fucking shoot me." He was laughing, reveling in the fact that at that moment he was untouchable. The gunman did, crying out in frustration. He gave up, pivoted on his heel, and shot the wall, a bullet piercing through a photo of the three of us standing 6 feet apart. Then he shot Jessie, who squeezed her eyes shut, letting out a wet-sounding sob. I heard the gunshot, but again there was no bullet. The guy stumbled back, my aunt's purse slipping from his fingers. What the fuck? He held the barrel to his own temple for a fraction of a second, like he was going to try on himself before clarity hit. "You're all fucked," the man whisper-shrieked, making a break for it, which left me alone with my cousins who didn't speak. I tried to untie them, but Jonas spat at me to stay away from him. Yet in the same breath, he told me to stay close. I didn't know what to tell them, because Aunt M's death wasn't the only thing eating away at me. There was a girl walking really slowly toward me, stalking me. I first noticed her at M's funeral. She was covered in bird shit, long dark brown hair scorched from her head. It was almost like she'd been struck by lightning so many times that it turned her into a beacon covered in blue, stringy, vine-like burns stretching across every inch of her. Her clothes hung in ragged tatters, jeans and a t-shirt clinging to her skeletal frame. I didn't think anything of her until she shot me a crooked grin, and I threw up halfway through the ceremony. That wasn't something that happened to me. I thought it was just unusually warm weather, but then I kept going hot and cold, shivering. I had never been sick, never suffered from illness. I figured I was just coming down with the flu for the first time. I thought I was hallucinating her, but the closer she got, straying in the shadows, the sicker I felt, until I had to go back to my car. I puked 3 times, each time more painful, each time filled with maggots wriggling between my teeth and skittering on my tongue. Jonas came to check on me, and from the look on his face, wide eyes, a strained attempt at a smile, I wasn't hallucinating. I didn't realize I was having a panic attack until my cousin forced me to tip my head back so he could tweeze the maggots from my throat with a pair of scissors. I couldn't understand his gentle features. He didn't hate me. His mother was dead, and Jonas somehow didn't despise me. "There's someone following me," I spluttered out once the remaining bugs had been extracted and Jonas's head found my shoulder. I thought he was asleep, but then he jerked, twisting toward me. "Wait, what?" His eyes were wide, lips curled. "What do you mean someone's following you?" "There was a girl," I whispered, my gaze dropping to my lap. "At the funeral, I saw a girl and she was getting closer to me, but I swear she's real." I grabbed my cousin, shaking him. Jonas didn't move, his gaze glued to me. "What did she look like?" I blinked at my cousin. "What? What did she look like?" Jonas repeated, his tone darkening. "If someone's stalking you, dude, that could mean anything. She could know about you." "I don't know, like, thin? Dark hair hanging in her face, like a fucking ghost." I spluttered out a laugh, but Jonas didn't join in. I had never seen my cousin look so pale, like all the color had been drained from his cheeks. Jonas shuffled back on his seat like he was going to pull the door open, but he didn't. He just sat there, staring at me. I guess this was where my cousin couldn't suspend his disbelief. She was wearing jeans and a shirt, and she was covered in blue scars. I swallowed, like she'd been struck by lightning. "You're seeing things," Jonas whispered after a bout of silence. "What?" "It's just trauma, Aris." Jonas's voice hardened. He jumped out of the car, holding his hand out for me to grab. "From what happened to Mom?" With a sickly smile, he patted me on the back. "We can get you to a doctor, all right? You're going to be okay." I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. The wind was strangely warm, but I was freezing cold. Instinctively, I whipped my head around, searching for the girl, but there was nobody there. "Okay, so what about the bugs? You saw them wriggling around in my fucking puke." Jonas didn't respond. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his suit pocket, stuck one in his mouth, and lit it up. I watched the orange flame dance around in the wind. "We should go back to the funeral," Jonas muttered through a drag. "Mom's waiting." We said goodbye to Aunt Em. Jessie held my hand, squeezing tight, but Jonas looked distracted the whole ceremony. When I risked a glance at him, his head was turned, searching the trees. That night, my condition got worse. My nose started bleeding, and I barely even noticed. I felt weak, my bones like lead. I couldn't think straight, my body on autopilot. We were eating dinner in silence when Jessie shrieked, her eyes widening. "Aris, your nose!" 3 droplets of blood hit the pristine white of my plate. I grabbed tissue paper and cleaned myself up, but it was no secret my luck was fleeting. I could see it in my cousins' faces as I scrubbed at my nose and then knocked my glass of water all over my plate. My bad luck meant I could no longer protect them, and if something bad was going to happen to me, surely they would be in the firing line. CPS was on our asses because we were still technically minors, and my bad luck was going to bring them right to the door. I stood up, ready to leave. I had already caused them enough pain, and sitting in my aunt's place hurt my heart. "It's okay, Aris." Jonas surprised me with a smile. I noticed he was distracted, having barely eaten. "We're not scared of you." He nodded to Jessie, who, while significantly pale, nodded back like a parent trying to reassure a child. "Of course we're not scared of you," she said, squeaking in fright when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out. Jonas stood using his phone's flashlight. "It's just the fuse box," he murmured when I jumped to my feet. "Jessie and I will go and fix whatever this is." He nodded to me. "Stay here, all right?" Jonas's gaze flashed to the chandelier hanging above us. "Don't move, Aris." I nodded, frozen in place. Jonas and Jessie left quickly, their phone flashlights dancing with them. I remained in the dark, staring up at the foreboding shadow of Aunt Em's chandelier, wondering if my time was up. My body was still going hot and cold, burning with fever, sweating through my t-shirt, then shivering. Jonas and Jessie had been gone for at least half an hour, and I was still trapped in the pitch black, too scared to move. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone, but it wasn't there. What was there was a splintered piece of glass, which I immediately sliced my finger on. Something slimy crept up my throat when I heard, and then glimpsed, the kitchen door slowly creaking open, which meant someone was in the kitchen. I thought back to the girl in the trees at Em's funeral, fight or flight forcing me to move, but I couldn't move. Instinctively, I pivoted, twisting myself toward the doorway. A figure bled into my vision. I shook my head, blinking rapidly to shake away the delusion, but it was still there. A shadow that hesitated at first before moving toward the front door in slow, dragging strides. Something jingled, scratching the ground, following its movements. I watched it, my heart pounding out of my chest, but somehow, the closer it got, the more my body steadied itself. I stopped going hot and cold, my temperature returning to normal, but I couldn't trust myself yet. If I moved, I could easily trigger something. The amount of blunt force objects in my aunt's living room needed to be studied. The chandelier was the obvious one, hanging above me. If I moved an inch, I could send it plummeting down on my head, the candles by the fireplace. They weren't lit, but I wasn't holding my breath that they would stay that way. I had quickly learned growing up that anything can fucking kill you. The safest option was to stay as still as possible and wait for my cousins. I kept telling myself the silhouette right in front of me wasn't real, but no matter how many times I shook my head, it was still there. Closer. The shadow was halfway across the living room, stepping carefully with tactical strides, like it knew I was there and was trying to avoid me. But it was near enough now, and my body was somehow stronger. I didn't feel weak, and the nausea that had been plaguing me all day was gone. Closer. The lights flickered. Closer. It hesitated, trying a running stride, instead coming to a staggering halt. My phone lit up on the other side of the room just as I sensed its shuddery breaths behind me. It was startled by the vibration. The light flickered on, suddenly filling the room with intense light, which took the shadow off the guard. When the light bled away from my vision, I found myself staring at a teenage boy. He was blonde, or used to be blonde. Half of his shaggy curls had been burned away, leaving grisly, scalding marks across the bald flesh of his head. He was skinny, almost skeletal, his cheekbones jutting out. The boy didn't look human. His skin was paper-thin, almost translucent, sharp teeth jutting from his gums. Instead, he resembled a creature from folklore, a member of the Fey folk. His arms were what my eyes were glued to, the exact same vein-like markings like lightning strikes covering every inch of him. They weren't just lines, they pulsed, jagged blue zigzags carved into his skin, vines coiled around his arms and fingers, threading through his fingers and forearms. They wrapped around his torso like restraints, entangling around his ribs, creeping up his throat, strangling his breath. These things were alive, creeping up his face, writhing under the flesh of his cheeks, already polluting his eyes. His clothes were filthy, shredded strips of what had once been a shirt and shorts. He only had to move, jerking backward, eyes widening, for me to see the cruel chains wrapped around his wrists. This was real. He wasn't a hallucination. He was standing right in front of me. Before I could speak, he darted toward the door. "Stay away from me," he finally said, his voice more of a broken whisper. He pulled open the front door and just stood there, to my confusion, basking in the cool night air. He took a hesitant step forward, but something bounced him back. I watched him try again, letting out a wet-sounding sob, this time being violently tugged back. The vines wrapped around him moved, tightening around his torso. Something rumbled beneath me. Earthquake? No, it was too small, not even strong enough to throw me off of my feet. I watched those same vines wrapped around him bleed from the walls, reaching toward the boy. He staggered back, dropping onto his hands and knees, crawling back. They caught him, coiling around his ankles before he violently tugged himself free. "Help me!" The boy finally broke into a sob. I started forward and he lurched away, his back against the wall. They were already coming out of the paintwork, twining around his neck. "No, stay the fuck away!" he cried, his voice growing strangled, the vines tightening around his throat. The boy's body contorted, his legs kicking against the restraints that pulled him further against the wall. Almost like he belonged in the foundations of my aunt's house. His breaths came out in sharp pants, and I understood when I got closer that I was hurting him. It only took a single step, and more of them sprouted, gagging his cries. Watching vines squeeze his throat, choking his breath, I stumbled back, reached into my pocket, and squeezed the splintered glass in my fist. The pain was a sharp sting, but already in front of me, those twisting tendrils were relaxing around his throat. Finally, they detached themselves from his torso, retracting back into the walls. I asked the first thing that came to mind, "Where did you come from?" "Downstairs," was all he said, his breath hitching. His head jerked up suddenly, eyes wide. "Where's the psycho woman?" "Psycho woman?" He averted his gaze, pulling dead vines from his neck. "I was 8 when she took me from my mom," he mumbled, burying his head in his knees. "She told me I'm her lucky charm." I made sure to distance myself, stumbling to the other side of the living room. The realization hit like ice-cold water. I wasn't lucky. Whoever this boy was, he was the source of my luck. This kid was my aunt's lucky charm, imprisoned to suffer while my cousins and I basked in fortune. But that didn't explain why he couldn't leave my house. I started with the basics, my body trembling. If I strayed too far from him, I would suffer. "What's your name?" I asked, edging closer. Close enough for us both to be okay. The boy scoffed, his gaze finding the floor. Freddie. I was trying to get to my phone without hurting him. When did my aunt take you? I asked, my voice breaking. Freddie lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't your aunt. I was snatched by an older woman. His words made me nauseous. There was only Aunt Em, my mom, Dad, and my cousins. I didn't have a grandma. I took another slow step toward my phone, keeping my voice low. When did this woman take you, Freddie? The boy bowed his head, wrapping his arms around himself. I don't know. I was 8, he whimpered. It was summer and I was playing, and she came out of nowhere. I nodded. I was so close to my phone, but also close enough to trigger his suffering. What year? Freddie squeezed his eyes shut, his lip curling. I don't know, he whispered. 1985? He was trembling, curling into himself like a child, burying his head in his knees. Can you stop asking so many questions? His words sent my thoughts into a tailspin. In 1985, he was 8 years old. Now in 2025, he was 18 at the oldest. This kid was either losing his mind or something ran far deeper than I realized. I grabbed my phone, inching back before I could trigger anything. Freddie watched me, his eyes narrowing. It took me a moment to realize he was staring at my phone. I turned it on only to see a single line cutting through the Apple logo. Broken, of course. What's that? He asked, his head inclined, kind of like a puppy dog. It's my phone, I said. Freddie took the slightest step toward me, his eyes wide. Your phone. I started to speak, though I wasn't even sure what I was going to say. Freddie didn't make sense, but neither did his connection to me. If he suffered, I would have fortune. If I was weak, he grew strong enough to fight back. My eyes found the door. I wondered how much pain I would have to be in to let him step over the threshold. Before I could bring it up as an option, the door swung open and in walked Jonas, pointing a gun at Freddie's head. Jessie followed, her arms wrapped around the nameless girl from the funeral, who stumbled with her. The girl's trembling were hands cruelly tied behind her back. Jessie was surprisingly gentle with her, letting the girl lean on her. Jonas, however, advanced toward Freddie, his lips curled in disgust. Aris. He spoke through gritted teeth, teasing the trigger. Freddie didn't move. Did you let it out? Jessie shoved the girl onto her knees, shooting me a smile. It's okay now, she grinned. We caught her. Her bright eyes found Freddie before narrowing into slits. Aris, she started to say, but I was done with my cousins. How? I managed to choke out, my knees threatening to give way. Why? The two exchanged glances, Jonas subtly shaking his head. All you need to know is that luck is smiling down on us, he said. Our family will always have fortune. Our ancestors made sure of that. Jonas's lip curled, his gaze flitted to the nameless girl. The thing standing behind you murdered Aris. He was fucking wrong. I killed your mom, I shrieked. I was losing every ounce of patience I had left. Jonas shook his head, lips pursed. Nope, her escape killed Mom. There has to be a balance, Jessie said softly. That's what Mom taught us. For someone to have fortune, another must suffer. Her eyes found mine, and I had never noticed the insanity twitching in her lips. Mom sacrificed herself over and over again so we could be happy. She laughed, and I found myself lurching back. Aris, she even sacrificed her own sister so we could be happy. Your own mother and then your father. They were offered in exchange for our happiness, the next generation. She sounded fucking insane. Isn't that amazing? Jessie's eyes sparkled. And it's just a little bit of suffering. They don't die because, well, they can't. We're just maintaining balance. Mom. It felt like being stabbed in the fucking back. Mom didn't just pop out of nowhere. She was a sacrifice. Like Freddie and the nameless girl. Well, why can't they leave? I demanded through a cry. I was so close to wrapping my hands around my cousin's throat until he turned blue. Whatever psycho shit my aunt had been involved in, she had pulled them into it. Jonas's lips curled into a smirk. Instead of speaking, he took my hand, gently dragging me down to our basement. I only saw the chains hanging from the walls, the human remains ground into the floor. I could see remnants of past sacrifices, the pearly white of bones ingrained into the walls. It made me wonder just how long this had been going on for. Freddie was kidnapped in 1985, presumably by a grandma I had never known, who left her filthy secret to my aunt. There was another boy, another prisoner, curled up on cold concrete, his head sandwiched in his arms. Jonas strode over to him, kicking him in the head. The boy didn't move. I could already see thick tendrils wrapped around his legs. Because they're not allowed to leave, Jonas answered my earlier question. His voice was light, almost casual. Mom says when she took them, she gave them to the house, offering up their blood and bones. In return, it promised endless fortune. His smile stretched wider. The ones who balance us are bound to this house, and to all of us, the only way to free them, he tilted his head slightly, eyes gleaming, is to destroy the house, and us with it. In 3 strides, he was standing in front of me, his breath in my face. What did my aunt do to him? Was he like this my whole life? Was he lying to me this whole fucking time? Jessie entered, pulling the other 2 prisoners with her. Wait. Freddie tried to speak, but Jessie was quick to gag him. Jonas flicked me in the forehead. So, I suggest you take a step back, Eris, and let her shower you with luck. I called my cousins fucking psychopaths and left the house. I found a $50 bill on the way to the sheriff's station. Behind me, an old man walked directly into the path of a bus. The sheriff's station visit went nowhere. I should have just said there were people being held prisoner and not mentioned the luck stuff. There is no balance. People die every day while others are brought into this world. My cousins have been brainwashed by whatever psychotic belief my aunt had. I'm on my own, so I'm going to burn this fucking house down. If I can light a fire and burn down the foundations of my aunt's house, I should be able to pull Freddie and the others out of the basement. I keep telling myself this, but I can't bring myself to light the match. I strike it and blow it out, strike and blow it out. That's what I've been doing for the past 2 hours. Fuck. As long as the house goes up in flames, I will be able to save them. I'm just not going to think about the other thing my cousin mentioned. I just pray Jonas is wrong.